Welcome to the VandySports podcast on the 440 Sports Network. I'm your host, Billy Derrick. This week's Vanderbilt football pregame show is brought to you by the Wash House, the Murfreesboro Pure Milk Company, Sutherland and Belk, John Levin and his company Wobble Bond Dickinson, and Yeaman Packaging Systems. Topics on today's show are brought to you by the Murfreesboro Pure Milk Company, family-owned, third-generation milk and ice cream distribution company located in Murfreesboro. A partnership began over 50 years ago with Purity Dairy in Nashville to provide purity milk and ice cream to consumers in Middle Tennessee, and they now serve Southern Kentucky, Northern Alabama, Chattanooga, and North Georgia. Today, they supply grocery stores, convenience stores, and others with purity products, as well as Mayfield, Nestle, and Haagen-Dazs ice cream. For more info, visit their website at mpmci.com. All right, we're previewing Vanderbilt in South Carolina, 3:15 p.m. Central Time kickoff on the SEC Network. It's the Commodores and the Gamecocks. We'll hear from Clark Lee discussing the health of Diego Pavia and Cedric Alexander. We'll check in with offensive lineman Steven Hubbard to talk a little bit about the Auburn game and carrying that mentality and mindset into this week against South Carolina. Also, as we always do each week, storylines to watch for with Joey Dwyer. And then we'll check in with Kevin Ingram, sideline reporter there on the Vanderbilt Radio Network. And then to close it out, Alan Cole from GamecockScoop.com to preview the South Carolina perspective of this matchup on Saturday. So a lot of stuff coming up here on today's pregame show. This matchup preview is brought to you by the Wash House. Are you dreading laundry day? Is it stealing time to do the things that you truly enjoy? Let the laundry professionals at the Wash House take care of that for you. With 2 convenient locations in the greater Nashville area, just drop off your dirty laundry, and their professional attendants can give you back the one thing you can never have enough of, your time. Within 24 hours, you can pick up your nicely folded, fresh and clean laundry, ready to be put away. Log on to washhouseclean.com or stop in today and get your time back. Well, Vanderbilt is trying to get their 7th win of the season on Saturday, sitting at 6-3 overall, 3-2 in the SEC as they welcome South Carolina. The Gamecocks are 5-3 overall, 3-3 in the SEC, and Shane Beamer's club 4.5-point favorites as they roll into Nashville. 3:15 kickoff at First Bank Stadium. You can watch on the SEC Network with Dave Neal and Aaron Murray on the call. Vanderbilt earned bowl eligibility last week for the first time since 2018 in a win over Auburn, going for their first win over South Carolina since 2008. They actually won back-to-back games against the Gamecocks in 07 and 08, but they've only beaten South Carolina 4 times. They're 4-29 all time against the Gamecocks. So for whatever reason, South Carolina's got Vanderbilt's number. Already this season, though, Vandy's made history. I mean, it feels like every week they're making a new piece of history. Beat Alabama and Auburn for the first time in the same season since 1955. They beat Alabama for the first time since 1984. Beat Auburn for the first time since 2012. This is their best start to a season since 1982, a team we've talked about a lot. They're looking to win their 4th SEC game for the first time since 2013 in one season. So all kinds of history being thrown around for this Vanderbilt team. And going back to that Auburn game, it was a 17-7 win for the Doors' first win ever at Jordan-Hare Stadium, which is hard to believe. Commodores opened the scoring. They scored first in this game, and they've done that 7 out of 9 games this season. They beat both Auburn, of course, and Alabama by doing that. Scoring first, fast start on defense as well. Jesse Mirko might have been the MVP Saturday, though. Vanderbilt's punter. He finished with 8 punts for 423 yards. His average of 53 yards per punt was second best by a Vandy punter in a single game. He was SEC Special Teams Player of the Week. With Diego Pavia and Cedric Alexander on the injury report, though, one has to wonder, heading into this game against South Carolina, if there will be any restrictions on them against the Gamecocks. Clark Lee said no to that question and added that they're feeling a little bit better this week. Take a listen.
No, not anticipating any. They've both been able to practice. I think Diego's just, it's wear and tear. Said he's a little more acute, but he's actually had a better week and felt better this week than he did last week. So game flow will dictate a lot, and anytime you're playing in a physical game like Saturday's going to be, we'll have to stick and move, but there's nothing I anticipate on the front end holding back or restricting.
That's Vanderbilt head coach Clark Lee. Obviously, it's going to be a physical game on Saturday. A lot of running of the football, a lot of offensive line and defensive line jawing at each other. I'm sure this is going to be physical. It's going to be a very physical SEC contest, and obviously Vanderbilt is worn down. Every team's worn down this time of year, and that brings us to this week's availability report. As I record this Friday morning, here's what it looks like. Bradley Mann is out. He's out for the season, suffered a torn ACL in last week's game against Auburn. So that is a new addition. We knew that Wednesday night, but again, that is a new addition. 3 guys are questionable. Wide receiver Quincy Skinner, cornerback Colby Taylor, and defensive lineman Christian James. Skinner and Taylor are noteworthy there. Christian James, not as worried about. Again, that's not a knock on Christian James. I think Vanderbilt has a good amount of depth there on the defensive line, and the D-line has played well these last couple weeks without a whole lot of Christian James. So, again, not super worried about that one. But Skinner and Taylor, I think you need those 2 guys in a physical contest against the Gamecocks. There are 4 players that are probable. 2 of them are quarterbacks. The 2 quarterbacks that we've seen play this season are probable to play. That means they're dealing with some issues. Nate Johnson dealing with an ankle issue. Diego Pavia probably dealing with a lot, but he's obviously going to give it a go. He is probable. Darian Wiley's probable as well, and Cedric Alexander, as we just talked about there. But as Clark said, Diego Pavia and Cedric Alexander, no restrictions. They're feeling better this week, and they'll be good to go. So that's a great sign for Vanderbilt's offense. All right, let's talk about the weather. It's going to be a little bit rainy on Saturday. It'll be cloudy in the morning, and then you got off and on rain and showers during the afternoon hours. The high is 72 degrees. So, again, it hasn't gotten cold yet, which is weird. It's already November 8th. It's really been in the 60s and 70s. And then you get into the nighttime, more periods of rain, 90% chance of rain it gets up to there at nighttime, and rainfall near a half an inch. So it's going to be a wet one Saturday afternoon in Nashville. With the Gamecocks coming into town, we're going to dive into them before we get into our interview portion of this pregame show. Carolina started the season 2-0 with a win over Old Dominion, a close win over Old Dominion. And I think a lot of people started to get a little concerned about the Gamecocks this year. Turns out they were just fine. They went to Kentucky and blew out the Wildcats 31-6. They returned home to play LSU. That was a very tough game, close game. Gamecocks lost it 36-33. Stay home in a big win over Akron, but then they lose 2 straight. The loss to Ole Miss at home, 27-3. That was ugly for the Gamecocks. And then they travel to Tuscaloosa and lose just by 2 to Alabama, 27-25. So this South Carolina team obviously is playing a lot better as of late. They struggled with turnovers to begin the season, but like I said, in the last few games or so, Lenore Sellers started to take care of the football a little bit more. They've won their last 2 games, started on the road a couple of weeks back at Oklahoma, big win for the Gamecocks. And then, of course, last weekend, the ABC Saturday night game, they put up 44 points against a really good Mike Elko Texas A&M defense. 44-20 was the final score there. We'll see if South Carolina can keep it going and stay hot on Saturday. Their offense averaging 31 points per game, sort of middle of the road in the SEC, 370 total yards per game. That's not a whole lot. That's bottom half of the league. 193 passing yards per game. That's bottom half of the league. But they do run the ball well. They average 177 yards on the ground per game. That's top half of the league. So with Lenore Sellers and his ability to run, Rocket Sanders, they do have a couple of dangerous receivers in Josh Simon and Mazio Bennett in the passing game. But Sellers and Sanders really carry this offense. Sellers' stats through the air aren't super impressive. 1,212 passing yards, 60% completion rate. Just 7 touchdowns through the air. He has thrown 4 interceptions. He's lost a couple of fumbles as well. So I think if Vanderbilt can force some turnovers on Lenore Sellers, they'll have a shot in this game. He's a phenomenal dual threat quarterback. Great runner, big, physical guy. He's hard to bring down, and he's playing well. He's played well the last couple of games for Carolina. He's carried the ball 99 times this year. So they will run with him. They will do QB power. He'll keep it on the read option game. He'll run it when the play breaks down. He is a good physical runner. Vanderbilt hasn't faced a running quarterback like this since Jalen Milroe. So other than maybe Kentucky with Wimsett, but he didn't play a ton. He's run for 353 yards this season, 4 touchdowns. So he will run the ball on you. Last week had his game of his life, game of the year for Sellers, 244 passing yards, 106 rushing yards against Texas A&M. So Lenore Sellers, Rocket Sanders, the 2 guys to watch on offense for Clark Lee's defense. And For Vanderbilt's offense, South Carolina's defensive line is as good as advertised. I mean, they've got Stewart, Kennard. That's a freakish defensive line. Vanderbilt's going to have to be prepared for, and not even a whole lot of blitzes. They get pressure with 4. Biggest game of the season for Vanderbilt's offensive line to try to get their 7th win of the year. Speaking of offensive line, we're going to roll into our interview portion and kick it off with Steven Hubbard, Vanderbilt's veteran offensive line transfer from UTEP. But first, our guest line as we kick it off with Steven Hubbard is brought to you by John Levin, good friend of the show, Wobble Bond Dickinson, his company. They thank the student athletes at Vanderbilt University for their dedication, effort, and hard work. Our guest line is also presented by Yeaman Packaging Systems, leaders in end-of-line packaging automation, and Sutherland & Belk, a family-owned injury law firm. If you or a loved one has been hurt or in an accident, give Taylor or Russell a call, 615-846-6200, to see what your rights are and if they can help. And now let's kick it on over to Vanderbilt offensive lineman Steven Hubbard. All right, Steven, I got to start after the game against Auburn. Obviously, the video surfaced with Diego. Obviously, nothing, wasn't a big deal, but just go through what happened after the game.
The camera was just right there. I was just telling the camera how Diego was up 3-0 on Hugh Freeze and then 2-0 on Auburn. And I guess they felt some type of way about it, but it is what it is.
What was the celebration like in the locker room? Were you one of the guys that shotgun one of the Sprites, or no?
I shotgun probably like 6 of them. Probably like 6.
6 Sprites?
Yeah.
Hey, that's a lot.
Stone Cold Steve Austin, man.
I want to get into your background a little bit. Your upbringing, where you grew up, like high school ball. How did you get into football, and what kind of started your love for football?
My uncle got me involved in football when I was at a young age. He used to have a barbershop. On C.E. King, and I was walking out the store next to his barbershop, and one of my first Little League coaches, Coach Al, he seen me, and then he just seen how big I was, and ever since then, I've been locked in with ball.
Before you got to Vanderbilt, was playing in the SEC something obviously you wanted to do, but was it something that you personally thought you could eventually get to in your college career?
At the time, no, because I wasn't playing SEC ball. But, the way things transpired last year, so it ended up having me being here playing.
Your relationship with Diego, you guys seem to be really close. When did that start? Was it right when he got here? Did you guys know each other before, and how was that sort of developed when he got here?
He's just the ultimate competitor. I'm an ultimate competitor, and we play in the same conference. So it's like right when I got here, we instantly clicked off.
What's the biggest difference between Conference USA and the SEC in your mind?
Speed and size and depth.
So far, has the defensive line surprised you? Was it what you expected, and have you had to learn how to maybe use your body more effectively? Obviously, Coach K has worked you guys a lot with that, but I guess what have you learned facing these SEC defensive lines?
I learned from Gunner that in this conference you have to be more efficient with your movements, and you have to have actual technique in this conference versus being a Conference USA where you kind of got you a couple dudes. You play a couple dudes a year versus this conference where every team you play, they're going to have what I say is every team we play in this conference, they're going to have good guys. In Conference USA, you have a team or two where, you feel me, couple guys, but this conference, they have good guys and great guys.
What is this offensive line with the strong guard, quick tackle, strong tackle? Take me through that, because I don't think a lot of people really understand that.
I'm actually one of the guys on the O-line that play both, so it just depends on what Coach K feel that week, whoever need to be moved or adjusted. I feel like I'm a pretty quick guy, but I'm actually a strong guy, so I can just do both. I like to say I'm Debo Samuel of the O-line.
The Union, is that what you guys call the offensive line?
The Union, yeah.
When did that start?
Coach K, he's been doing it for 40 years, so I think this is the 40th group, I want to say. So, yeah, it came from him.
South Carolina, obviously a really good defensive line. What's the focus this week in practice, and how have you guys felt heading into the game?
Just got to be physical. They're a great group of guys, fast, move really well. Just got to be physical, knock them off the ball.
Feels like it's gotten a little bit harder for the offense, maybe not necessarily to run the football, but finding space in the passing game. Diego's been protected, but what do you think has gone into maybe some of the slowness? I mean, you guys have faced great defensive lines, but it's been a little bit harder offensively, it feels like.
It's like, yeah, you're not lying. This past 3 weeks, bro, we've been struggling. Last week, I'm going to keep it a band with you. If that team had even a better offense, we would have been in a very tight game. tighter than what we was even in, because this past week our offense has not been looking good. But that's more up to us as players. We just got to execute. On offense, is always just one or two guys who always just, you know what I'm saying, somebody always in the backfield, miss a block here, miss a block there. And offense, 11 got to be as one. So execution, just got to stay focused, locked in.
Obviously, every team is banged up this time of year. How are you feeling? And do you get the sense the team is, having to fight through some ails and some slight injuries? I mean, nobody's had a serious injury. I know Bradley Mann went out last week with an ACL, but how do you feel, and then how do you get the sense that this team feels right now?
I mean, I feel great, and I feel like I take a big responsibility on just making sure everybody know, like, it's okay to know that you injured, not injured, but know that you banged up, know that you feeling sore, but at the same time, you got to know no one cares. So everybody else feel how you feel. So I feel like it's up to me to just let everybody know that no one cares, but I'm also still here with y'all, and I feel the same.
You guys aren't done yet, obviously. What makes you believe that this team can do even more? You're bowl eligible, but this isn't the finish line.
We just got to, day by day, man, practice by practice, take it week by week. We at the point of the season right now where we take everything week by week. So we take it week by week. No one knows what could happen.
Steven, good luck Saturday. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Kicking off this week's pregame show like we normally do with Mr. Joey Dwyer ahead of Vanderbilt in South Carolina. Joey, I want to start with the injury report because I think it is important this week. And it's important. Obviously, it's important every week, but it really hasn't been much of a factor so far this season for Vanderbilt. Bradley Mann is out for the season with a torn ACL, so that adds to the out status. But, I mean, all the guys that have been out haven't been factors. So I think that's been something to watch other than, Zaylen Wood early in the season. And but like Diakite and Grayson Morgan haven't played a ton. Add Bradley Mann to that out list. Questionable, Quincy Skinner, Colby Taylor, Nate Johnson. Not sure how that happened. Christian James, probable. And this is good news. Pavia and Alexander. I'm interested to see how truthful that is, though. And again, it's probable to play. But I wonder, it'd be interesting to see if there were percentages, if you had to write percentages of health for these guys. I'd be interested to see that, especially with Pavia and Alexander, because, I mean, Joey, those are the engines to this offense. It'll be interesting to see how healthy they are.
Yeah, I mean, they're banged up, Billy, and I think Vanderbilt as a whole is banged up, but particularly in the run game, they're banged up. And we talked about that on the roundtable yesterday, but it's a good South Carolina defensive line, not one that's impossible to run on. But also it's tough to run when your two biggest running threats are banged up. I think Tim Beck's going to have to get creative, especially in the run game, finding a way to get Monty Jones downhill, finding a way to get A.J. Newberry kind of on the perimeter. It's going to be big to see how much Diego Pavia is actually able to use his legs, because I think that's such a huge piece of their offense. And if he's got to sit in the pocket and just hand it off to guys, I think they might be in some trouble offensively, at least in terms of what they can do via the run. I think Skinner's a big one, too, because we were talking about him as a guy who's got to step up, and I still think that's the case, but you just wonder what's his snap count look like, things along those lines. So the injury report is interesting. I don't think Vanderbilt's necessarily going to be without a lot of guys that are super impactful, but I do think that a lot of their go-to guys are banged up, and something worth noting.
I'm interested, going into Auburn, a lot of the talk was expect a low-scoring game. Taking care of the football is huge. Vanderbilt's offense is banged up. What are they going to look like? We keep asking questions, and that's our job, of course. But Vanderbilt keeps answering them. One way or the other. They've drive down the field in almost 9 minutes at the end of the game, and punch the ball in the end zone and go up 17-7, and that's the ball game. Joe, does this compare to Auburn for you? I mean, heading into South Carolina, because to me it does. I think Carolina's defensive line is a little bit better. But I mean, it's nothing this team hasn't seen this season. South Carolina, it's another good SEC team, and I think I've made the mistake of saying, well, South Carolina isn't Alabama or Texas. Comparing that, it's an SEC team, coming into your house. So I guess what I'm getting at is, how does this South Carolina matchup compare to the Auburn matchup in your mind?
I think they're a little bit more dangerous offensively because of Laura Seller's legs, and that's really where I look at it, is a little different. I think the defensive line is a little bit better, but I don't think any of that is anything that Vanderbilt hasn't seen before necessarily. They've seen Jalen Milroe, they've seen Kentucky's D-line, they've seen Auburn's D-line. I think it is probably going to be low scoring, but I also think Vanderbilt's equipped to handle those type of games. My bigger thing is just what does Vanderbilt do? Because I think the offense has sputtered a little bit in the last couple weeks. I think Eli Stowers alluded to that on Tuesday. The offense has got to get going a little bit. They've got to put together some longer drives, not just late in the fourth quarter, but also throughout the entirety of the game. They've got to take care of the ball. They've got to force turnovers. I think South Carolina does have some capability for home run plays. They've got some guys who I think really have some speed on the perimeter, and Sellers' legs, I think, added dimension of their offense. Vandy hasn't seen a whole lot. I think they've seen it a couple times and have done a really good job with it, but it's always something you've got to account for, especially after playing against Peyton Thorne and Ball State. So it's going to be different. And Texas, I don't even think, had as much of an element of that as South Carolina did, but also Texas is a much better offense than South Carolina. I think they have much better players on the perimeter. So, Billy, I think a lot of this is South Carolina's a little different, but I do think it tends to be low scoring in a matchup like this. But it's about Vanderbilt, right? It's about, can Vanderbilt come out and execute offensively? Does Vanderbilt avoid the big play defensively? Do they force a turnover defensively? Do they avoid turning it over offensively? I mean, it's all about Vanderbilt at this stage of the season. And for a lot of the year, Vanderbilt has really answered the call in that way.
Joey, I think a big stat Saturday night, and I mentioned this to you and Chris, whoever wins the turnover battle wins the game. And I think the weather plays into that. 90% chance of rain, winds up to 20 miles per hour. So good luck kickers. That could affect punts as well. It's going to affect quarterbacks' desire to throw the football and ability to throw the football. But both quarterbacks and offenses really are going to try to establish the run. But Joey, I mean, this could be 13-10.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because Auburn, Vanderbilt goes down to Auburn. Auburn's offense, and we talked about it, they had been explosive. They had, it's not like they were averaging 10 points per game. They had been scoring 21, 27, into the 30s. Like they had put up points. And so I think the low scoring potential of this game is as much about Vanderbilt's defense and how they're playing right now, as it is the weather or, a wet football or a fumble, special teams play. I think it's going to be ugly. I think that's how Vanderbilt wants it. We'll see what happens, but I think the weather will play into this one way or the other.
The good news for Vanderbilt is that if the weather's bad, I think that plays towards them a little bit. I think South Carolina has an element that makes it difficult in the weather, but also Vanderbilt's defense has been really, really good the last couple weeks, and especially the last week. And their special teams has been really good as well. Brock Taylor has been really solid. Martel Height looks like one of the best punt returners in the country. They look sound in terms of what their gunners are doing. I mean, they're a really well-coached unit, special teams-wise, from the looks of it. And they've got talent there, too. They're not just fundamentally sound. Brock Taylor, I think, is a better leg than a lot of SEC kickers. Martel Height's a better punt returner than I would say most SEC teams have. So they have an advantage there in the weather. And they've also got an advantage because their D-line is so deep, and they're able to rotate a lot of bodies. Obviously, Bradley Mann being out doesn't help, but I still think they've got a lot of guys that can come in and at least be a body for a couple of plays. And I think maybe the deficiency of the Vanderbilt defense is the corners in some ways, but if the weather's poor, it's hard to get exploited that way, right? So I think Vanderbilt's really going to have some room defensively to dominate in this game if the weather looks to be what it's going to be.
All right, last thing, Joey, and we'll get to this with last-minute thoughts on Saturday. What's going to determine this game? I know I just mentioned the turnover battle, but I guess adding on to that, what's another thing you're watching heading into Saturday that you think could play a huge factor when Vanderbilt welcomes the Gamecocks?
I just wonder if Vanderbilt can hit on an explosive play or put together a long drive, because I think that's what's going to determine this. I think whoever puts together, say, 2 long touchdown drives can win this game. I don't think it's going to be super high scoring by any means. I think you mentioned the turnovers. That's a huge thing. I also just wondered, does any team put together a sustained long drive in that weather against these defenses? And that's something I'm watching. I think it's going to be kind of an ugly game, but I think that kind of plays to what Vanderbilt wants at this point in the year. They've been in a lot of ugly games, and they've won just about every one of them. So I don't have much to say or much to stand on to say Vanderbilt won't win this game. I do think it's going to take Diego Pavia making a couple plays here and there to put together a long scoring drive, or Vanderbilt to hit on a play in space or get AJ Newberry in space and he'll make a play, something along those lines. I think a playmaker for Vanderbilt's going to have to step up that maybe hasn't thus far, at least on a play or two. and I think Vanderbilt's going to have to avoid the big turnover. Billy, this is an interesting matchup. Vanderbilt, obviously, with a long losing streak to South Carolina. Chris Freeman, the basketball PA guy, I think every time I talk to him about Vandy football, he brings up that they've lost to South Carolina so many times in a row, and he doesn't believe they'll ever beat South Carolina. I think is I don't know if he has told me that, but I think he believes that. So even subconsciously, I'm not sure a lot of Vandy fans could ever see them beating South Carolina. So it'll be an interesting weekend because I do think Vandy probably a better team than South Carolina at this point, or at least comparable. So it'll be interesting to see if they can pull it off at home. This would almost be one of their more remarkable outcomes just based off history and kind of the taste that South Carolina has put in Vanderbilt fans' mouths over the years.
Yeah, after the Auburn game, Clark had mentioned in his post-game celebration, talking to the guys, he said, let's get back to work. We got South Carolina this week. We still got some games left. And, we keep going, then this thing gets really fun. This thing isn't over yet. Vandy beats South Carolina. They're in the college football playoff rankings. You go on the road and beat LSU, you inch closer. You're probably bubble talk. You beat Tennessee, you never know. That's where this team is at, Joey. They're not being talked about. And I did think it was interesting they weren't in the rankings, but it's out in front of them. They're alive, and that's something I don't think either of us thought we'd be saying. So it'll be interesting. Vanderbilt, South Carolina. Again, we'll have all the coverage on Saturday, 3:15 kickoff. I like that 3:15 time, by the way. If you're coming to the game, bring your poncho, your rain jacket to stay dry.
Yeah, we'll be nice and up in the box, Billy.
Yeah, it was frigid cold.
We probably won't be warm up in the box this week. It'll probably be freezing again.
That's the thing. I don't know that we'll be warm, Joey, but wear pants and bring a sweatshirt. That's what I'll tell you.
Bring your Q-zip, Billy. It's quarter zip season.
Bring your Q-zip. Joey, I'll see you Saturday.
See you Saturday.
Rolling along with this week's pregame show with a visit from Kevin Ingram, Vanderbilt sideline reporter on the Vanderbilt Radio Network there on 102.5 The Game, also occasionally on 94.9 The Fan. Kevin, let's start with the Auburn game. Vanderbilt becomes bowl eligible for the first time since 2018. There's history notes everywhere. Joey and I couldn't even keep up after that game. First win over Auburn and Alabama the same season since 1955. I asked Allegretta this a few weeks ago, and I had him on. How much fun are you having? I don't know that many people associated with Vanderbilt football have had this much fun in a long time.
Yeah, it has been a minute, Billy, and I appreciate you having me on. Yeah, it's been a really fun season, and it feels like when you go back a few weeks and you think about coming out of the Georgia State game and the tough loss in Missouri in overtime, you kind of wondered, okay, what's next? And then all of a sudden we've gone on this magical ride where Vanderbilt's won all but one game. That was the Texas game, and that was a close one against a top 5 team here in Nashville. So it's been really fun. I think more than anything for me, I just enjoy it for the people involved. And I think when you get a little older and you've done this a while, I think that's one thing you learn to appreciate more is it's more about the coaches and the players. And Clark Lee, who's is a Vandy guy. He's a Nashville guy. This program, this town means so much to him. He's poured so much of his life into this program over the last few years when he's been coach. And just seeing the reactions of the players and how much fun they're having. I interviewed C.J. Taylor after that game at Auburn, I should say, the other day. And just to see the look of satisfaction for him, a guy who came here and was here when Clark, first year with Clark Lee, and has been through a lot of ups and downs. And I think maybe even considered going somewhere else after last season, but he made a position change and came back, and he's really happy he did. And it's worked out great. And you do appreciate the guys who stuck with it and gone through some rough years. Last year was really difficult. The year before turned out to be pretty good, but this year has been something very different and really fun and special.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Clark Lee, and it's been really interesting to look at the differences between him last year and even the first 3 years compared to him this year, and the pregame speeches and the build up to these games and the celebrations. And it feels like the infiltration of New Mexico State, whether it's coaches, players, Jerry Kill, got some older coaches to come in here, have really brought out a lot in Coach Lee that I'm sure you've seen being the sideline reporter. I like you're hearing more jokes. Obviously, a 2-10 season might do that to you, where you sit there and you look at and all right, what do I have to do to change this program? He did that, and I've sensed a very different Coach Lee this season.
Yeah, and I think we saw that when we recorded our coaches show on Monday. We do it around lunchtime, and he comes in, sits down, and we spent about an hour with him. And I thought Monday was about as relaxed and fun as I've seen Clark maybe all season, or maybe at any point that we've done the show with him over the last few years that he's been head coach. You could just tell. And I know there's a lot of work to be done, but you could tell like how much this means to him, and how special it was to have that scene in the locker room after the game, and then go back a few more days to last Saturday. He comes out of the locker room, and I could hear it all going on in there. I'm right outside the locker room waiting to do our post-game interviews, and I could hear some of what was going on. It was pretty loud, and there was music, and it was fun. And Clark comes out, and he's wearing a T-shirt. They had some T-shirts ready for him, and so he's wearing the Bowl T-shirt, and he's like soaking wet, and he's just so happy. That part was really fun. And same thing when CJ came out. I mean, he said, yeah, man, they were spraying Sprite all over the place, and his phone got wet, and everything was sticky. And he's trying to like text people back while we're sitting there waiting to do the interview. It was really pretty funny. But yeah, for Clark, it's been really satisfying. And I know satisfying, yes, but not completely satisfied in terms of the goals that can still be accomplished for this team. You got 3 more games to play. I mean, you can still do some more really big things in this season if you're Vanderbilt. And you mentioned the New Mexico State element to it. There are 9 people that were part of the New Mexico State win at Auburn last year that are on Vanderbilt's team this year, whether it's players or coaches. I mean, so much has been made of Diego Pavia and Eli Stowers and Jerry Kill and Tim Beck. Those have been the main ones that everybody has certainly known about. And those guys have been such a huge part of what's going on with this offense this season. And it's been fun. I jokingly called it, they added several staff members from New Mexico State. I jokingly called it the staff of enchantment going into the season, the whole New Mexico State enchantment. But it is, man, it has worked fantastic, and probably even better than anybody could have imagined. It's been really fun, and you can tell I like seeing Coach Kill and Coach Beck around, and see them on game day. Man, they're very intense and ready to roll. But see them out of practice too, and it's really fun to visit with those guys and just seeing them around.
Well, I like getting your sideline perspectives. I do want to get into where this team is at, physically, and obviously guys are going to be banged up, right? I mean, Diego Pavia and Cedric Alexander were both listed as probable on the injury report. You got some other guys that are questionable. Obviously, awful that Bradley Mann suffered the torn ACL. He'll be out for the rest of the season. But from your perspective, Kevin, how ailed has Diego been? And again, you can't. You're not always getting a clear picture. It's not like you're in the injury tent or anything. But what kind of sense do you get that some of the struggles, the latest struggles offensively, could be potentially contributed by an ailing Pavia or an Alexander that had to be tended to? Like how much are the injuries connected to some of the lack of success offensively, although they've faced better defenses, so that's a part of it as well?
I think that's probably the bigger answer, Billy. I just play good defenses. I mean, Auburn had a good defense. They really shut Vanderbilt down for a whole lot of the day. The Commodores took advantage in the second half, and they kind of played field position and pinned them back with a punt, and then had a good return by Martell Height that helped set up the field goal. And then, that last drive was a really good drive, and caught a break there on the penalty after what would have been a field goal. And instead, you take the points off the board, and then you go back and you score a touchdown and make them pay for their mistake, and that was really big. I don't know that I can speak to the injuries or how much that's affecting anything. Diego, I mean, for just the way he plays, I mean, he's bound to be super banged up. But I mean, I know he's whatever he's listed at. I'm going to say he's 1,000,000% probable to play, because I mean that guy is just a baller. I mean, he's a warrior. He comes out there and he does his thing every week, and he loves to compete. I think that's the thing that I enjoy most, is just how much that guy likes to compete. And really, you mentioned Cedric Alexander. I mean, he's been banged up for a bit here, and there was some question as I think to whether he was going to play at Auburn. And we got word a few minutes before the game. Yeah, I said he's
the brace off.
Yeah, I don't think he was a big fan of wearing the brace. The brace. He just wanted to get out there and see what he had, and he gutted it out. He's a guy who's not only a good running back, but he's a key blocker in their scheme. And so you don't want to see Cedric over on the sideline for very long. And, they have some other options at running back, and we saw a little bit more of Monty Jones, Chase Gillespie in that game, and AJ Newberry's been really good, not just running the football, but as a pass catcher. So they have some options there, but he's been a key part for this team this season, and you hope that just maybe getting a little rest and maybe backing off a little bit on practice. I think like Coach Lee has tried to do this week from the physicality. You put in the time, but maybe you back things down just a little bit to help preserve guys as you get into this final quarter of the season.
Gamecocks roll into town on Saturday. They're coming off a big win over Texas A&M at home. And Shane Beamer's team is, they're a physical bunch. You've got a really good defensive line that like we've talked about all week. Sellers is playing better. They're protecting the football. In your mind, Kevin, what's it going to take for Vanderbilt to win this game? I've told people that if you win the turnover battle, you win the game. I don't know if you agree if it's that simple, because I do think it'll likely be a low-scoring battle. But what in your mind will determine this game on Saturday?
Yeah, I think a turnover could be gigantic. I mean, and that was a big factor in the game at Auburn the other day. It was a low-scoring grind of a game, and I think we'll probably see something similar this week. The weather could be a factor for the first time in a long time. I feel like, and I don't know, maybe this is oversimplifying things, but the weather's been fantastic all season. I think that's really helped Vanderbilt in some ways. I mean, you're able to that doesn't come into play when it's not pouring down rain or snowing or wind blowing or whatever it is like we see sometimes. But it is supposed to be bad, I think, probably early in the game. I don't know how that'll affect things. Both these teams certainly like to do some damage on the ground. South Carolina played great in that second half against Texas A&M the other night. It was 20-20 at halftime, and then they just blew their doors off in the third and fourth quarters. But, yeah, you mentioned Lenore Sellers. He had a good day passing, 244 and a couple touchdowns, and carried for over 100 yards and got into the end zone there too. And Rocket Sanders was terrific in that game. But I think a lot of it too is, like you mentioned, it's going to come down to how Vanderbilt performs against that defensive front they have. I mean, they have some pass rushers, and they are really stout on that defensive line. So Vanderbilt's O-line is going to have a good day, and you're going to have to move the ball, and you're going to have to grind and play field position. And a guy like Jesse Mirko is probably going to be a key guy again. In a game where it's a grind of a game and a victory at Auburn, to me, the punter was one of the key guys. I mean, when you talk about those field position battles and his ability to pin Auburn inside the 5 a couple of times, I feel like he could be a factor in this one too. He won Special Teams Player of the Week in the SEC. So I think it'll be another one of these games, maybe a little bit like Auburn. I think South Carolina's offense is better than Auburn's, but it's been interesting to look at their results this season. I mean, they've had some close calls, and they almost beat Alabama the week after Vanderbilt played them here. A week after Vanderbilt beat Alabama here, they went to Kentucky, won in a blowout. Same thing at Oklahoma. They did the same thing to A&M this past week. So they have had some really good performances this season. This is going to be a tough game.
Looking forward to it, Kevin. Bring your poncho with the first half rain, and looking forward to seeing you out there. And good luck on the call. Thanks for checking in.
I appreciate it, Billy. Thanks for the time, man.
Wrapping up this week's pregame show with a visit from Alan Cole from Gamecock Scoop. Covers the Gamecocks for their rivals site as Vanderbilt gets set to do battle with South Carolina. 3:15 local time kickoff here in Nashville at First Bank Stadium. Should be a good crowd for that one. Alan, let's start with the Gamecocks, though. Last weekend, I don't know about shock the country, because I actually did. I expected South Carolina to go up there. They're at home to play A&M tough and maybe even win the game, and they did. But what did anything surprise you last weekend from South Carolina's effort there? And I mean, to put up 44 and for the defense to play as well as they did against an A&M team that people were talking about as a potential playoff team.
Yeah, I wasn't super surprised about what the defense did. They've done that against pretty much everyone this year, not named LSU. They've kept them in every game almost. I was mostly surprised by the offensive line performance. Just, this is a young group. I mean, they're starting a true freshman at left tackle, a couple transfers at guard. And it's gotten better throughout the year, but nothing like what you saw Saturday. Almost 300 rushing yards, no sacks allowed, no holding penalties, no false starts even. That was about as complete of an offensive line performance as they've had in years. And I think that, especially against an A&M defensive line that, like you say, is really good, is really deep. That was what mainly jumped out at me. I think this team is pretty good in general, and the defense has been good all year, but I definitely wasn't expecting an offense, and specifically an offensive line performance like that.
we saw Sellers and the offense struggle as a whole for a good bit there. I mean, to start the season with turnovers and some sloppy play, but they've gotten it rolling here, and they've put up points, right? I mean, they haven't been non-existent, but like Auburn, the team Vanderbilt played last week actually. The turnovers just have killed them. So what has contributed to the offense sort of finding more of a rhythm, taking care of the football, and doing what they did last week?
I think so much of it is just the reality of starting a redshirt freshman quarterback, and not just a redshirt freshman, but he was banged up to start the year. He missed about a quarter of the game at Kentucky. He got hurt in the last drive of the first half against LSU, missed that whole second half and the game the next week. So you got into October and he'd only played in one game wire to wire. You knew the talent, you knew it was there, you knew there was going to be growing pains, some of the decision making, the ball security, all that stuff. But I think you're just seeing the process of a quarterback who's actually stayed healthy for about a month now, getting to play a full game every week, an SEC game every week, and just starting to figure it out the way you'd expect a young quarterback to. And it's one of those things where all you can do is get reps, right? You can do practice all you want, but you got to play in games. And now that he's been able to play, I guess this would be 4 in a row now, wire to wire, after only one of the first 4. He just looks more comfortable, better understanding of the offense, and obviously you're starting to see the talent come out.
The defensive line. That's what everybody talks about at South Carolina. Vanderbilt's played Texas. They had a pretty good defensive line, but I don't think they've seen a defensive line like South Carolina's. And I mean, word on the street is that, they don't blitz that often. I mean, they're getting pressure with their front 4 just because of how freakish they are. So how dominant have they been? I mean, like, is that a unit that can take over a game?
Absolutely. You mentioned the not blitzing. I haven't run it from the A&M game, but through the Oklahoma game, which is the game before A&M, they had 29 sacks this year, and 21 of them were with 3 or 4 rushers. So they really aren't blitzing that much. They don't have to. Kyle Kennard, the Georgia Tech transfer, was leading the SEC in sacks going into last week. I don't know if he still is, but Dylan Stewart, the 5-star freshman's playing like it. TJ Sanders, defensive tackle, might be a first-round pick up the middle. 2 other senior defensive tackles in there. It's just a deep, deep group. They stay fresh. They get bodies in and out. They get pressure. They cause havoc. And yeah, like you said, they don't really have to blitz. They kind of rarely do, and it's still been enough against almost everyone they've faced this year.
All right, let's get into this matchup. I think it's a big, big game. And, I say not a lot of people are talking about it. I do think there's some hype and anticipation for this game. What do you expect matchup wise? And like, what are you looking at with this game that you think could tell the story of it at the end of this game?
I think it's all about, Clayton White, South Carolina's defensive coordinator, was in media today just talking about Diego Pavia. And I think that's kind of where it begins and ends for anybody who's playing against Vanderbilt. I think South Carolina got a taste of a dual threat quarterback with Marcel Reed last week in A&M, but obviously a much less experienced one. That was a home game. This is on the road. And yeah, I think that's the main thing I'm looking for. Is I expect South Carolina to get pressure against anyone they face. I think at this point there's enough of a sample size to say that's going to happen. But can you maintain your run lanes? Can your linebackers be good in space? Can you tackle in space? Because Pavia is going to get outside the pocket. He's not going to be as prone to taking sacks as some of the other quarterbacks South Carolina's faced, even though I do think he'll be under pressure for a lot of the games because that's just what South Carolina's good at doing. But for me, the matchup is, can you tackle in space? Can you prevent Pavia from making the big plays? Can you be as good outside the pocket as you are inside the pocket as a defense is my thing.
All right. Obviously, you know more about South Carolina than I do. Where are the weaknesses? Where are the cracks with this team as a whole that Clark Lee and Vanderbilt should be attacking? Like if you're talking to Clark, where are the areas that you would suggest attacking the South Carolina team?
Yeah, I still think even though for as well as it played last week, the offensive line is young and probably isn't going to play that well again this week. I expect them to, I don't know, not rush for 300 yards again this week. But so there's an offensive line question for sure. Sellers, for all he did last week, he was still under pressure a decent bit. He was able to get outside of it, but A&M's edge rushers did get almost home a few times. And then on defense, the back end hasn't been bad by any means, but they have had some problems at corner, some explosive plays, gave up a deep shot to Oklahoma. They misfit a gap, gave it a long touchdown against Texas A&M last week. So the explosive plays are kind of what I would be looking at. Some deep shots. I know that's not really
Mhm.
what Vanderbilt does. They kind of like to grind it out, play slower. But I think there's some matchups on the outside for Vanderbilt to exploit on offense, just against South Carolina's cornerbacks. And then defensively, I'm still not completely sure South Carolina's offensive line is fixed or great, even though definitely last week was definitely the best it's played all year.
Yeah, to me, Alan, I told somebody this yesterday. I think I'm feeling 13-10, 14,
Yeah.
17-14.
Supposed to rain
And
too,
not,
I think.
yeah, it's supposed to rain. I told somebody yesterday, whoever wins the turnover battle probably wins the game. And that's not uncommon, right? But not all the time. Sometimes, like SMU was -6, a couple weeks
Against
ago.
Duke,
And
yeah.
yeah, and they won. But obviously that's an outlier. But I think in this game, and I'm interested to see if you agree, turnover margin wins it. Whoever wins that.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. I mean, just look at the last 2 weeks. You mentioned it earlier, but South Carolina had such a turnover problem early in the year. 3 against LSU, 4 against Alabama. That's probably the reason they lost both those games. Those, a 2-point game and a 3-point game. But the last 2 weeks, the last 2 games, I guess they had a bye, so 3 weeks. No turnover against Oklahoma, none against A&M. You win both those games pretty comfortably. That's the whole thing. Like, this offense has been good and efficient when it's held on to the ball, but that's been a big if all year, and it really hasn't happened until the last 2 games. So, yeah, I think if South Carolina finishes at 0 in the turnover battle, it has a pretty good chance to win. And likewise, if Vanderbilt can hold on to the ball and, go on some 6, 7, even 8-minute drives like they're prone to do. And I don't know if they're going to completely tire out South Carolina's defense because it's so deep, especially up front, but it'll be a challenge they haven't seen a lot of this year.
All right, I like asking this question. What's your feel on what happened Saturday? Because South Carolina is a team coming off a huge win, probably their biggest win of the season, and immediately a lot of the talk has been, well, can they do it twice? They did that twice a couple of years ago when South
Tennessee and
Carolina
Clemson, yeah.
right, and so. And again, every year's different, but you feel like that's a strength of Beamer in this program to carry it over? Because I've talked to a lot of people about South Carolina. It feels like it's been a little bit of a roller coaster at times in seasons with Beamer, where he'll have a huge win and then you have a loss where like the loss in Gainesville a couple years ago. So what's your feel on what happens considering what happened last week for South Carolina?
Yeah, I don't know if last week plays as much into it as people are saying. I understand people might think, oh, this is a letdown spot. I think Vanderbilt's good enough to have South Carolina's attention right now, with the way they've been playing. Vanderbilt coming off its own big win to get bowl eligible last week. I think this is kind of the game within itself and not so much the surrounding context. I'm willing to give South Carolina benefit of the doubt right now because of how well it's played the last 2 weeks. And I think just in general, the entire Shane Beamer era, they did better in November. I mean, even last year was a 5-7 season, but they went 3-1 in November. They played better down the stretch, even though that wasn't a very good team. So I'm picking South Carolina to win the game. I think it'll be tight, definitely one score. I would not at all be surprised if Vanderbilt won, but I don't think it's because of a letdown spot or losing focus. I think if Vanderbilt wins, Vanderbilt's just a pretty good football team that would win a tight game at home.
All right, we'll see what happens. Obviously, Gamecock fans going to be in Nashville. Alan, safe trip down here, and
Appreciate it.
looking forward to Saturday's game. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks for having me on.
All right, that'll do it. Big game for the Commodores, Vanderbilt and South Carolina. Again, 3:15 kickoff. You can watch it on the SEC Network. It's going to be a wet one. Bring your rain jacket. Bring your poncho. Make sure you stay dry Saturday if you're headed to West End. Should be a phenomenal atmosphere and crowd. Obviously, it's already a sellout. We'll see what happens on Saturday. This podcast has always been free, and we plan for it to be free, so here's how you can help keep it that way. First off, give the podcast a review and a 5-star rating. That helps us get noticed. If you're listening and haven't subscribed to VandySports.com yet, please do. It's $99 a year, $9.99 a month. That helps us tremendously to continue our great coverage of Vanderbilt athletics. Then subscribe to our Vandy Sports YouTube channel. Also, if you're interested in sponsoring the show, email Chris Lee at chrislee70@gmail.com. Again, big thanks to Steven Hubbard, Clark Lee for his comments, Joey Dwyer, Kevin Ingram, and Alan Cole. For myself, Billy Derrick, you've been listening to another episode of the Vandy Sports Podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you again soon with more episodes right here on the 440 Sports Network.